Everyone knows the name King Arthur. It's one of those names that sticks, even if you don't remember the details. Something about a sword and a stone, a round table, maybe a wizard in the background. But the real story? It's deeper than that, messier, and far more human. Because Arthur wasn't just born a king. He wasn't crowned by fate or cheered on by destiny. He came from silence, from shadows, from decisions that no one saw coming. His kingdom didn't rise overnight. It was carved out of chaos, one choice at a time. Some of those choices were noble, others, not so much. This isn't a fairy tale about a perfect ruler in shining armor. It's about a man, flawed, brilliant, loyal to a fault, trying to hold something good together in a world that kept testing him. He fought wars, built peace, and trusted people who would eventually betray him. And through it all, he kept going, even when the cost was too high. If you're looking for magic swords and noble quests, sure, you'll find them here. But more than that, this is the story of how legends are made, and what they leave behind when the crown falls and the fires go out. So let's start at the beginning. This is the story of King Arthur. Arthur wasn't born into a peaceful world. He was born into chaos, into a land torn apart by warring lords, fragile alliances, and the smoldering ruins of Roman withdrawal. Britain was leaderless, restless, hungry for a king. But the man who would become that king wasn't born in a throne room. He was born in secret, conceived in deception, hidden at birth, and raised in quiet anonymity. His father was Uther Pendragon, High King of the Britons, a fierce warrior, a man with iron in his voice and fire in his ambition. But he wasn't satisfied with power. He wanted something more. And that something was Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Cornwall. Uther had tried diplomacy, persuasion, even outright negotiation to win her, but nothing worked. So, in the end, he turned to the one man who could twist the shape of fate itself, Merlin. The wizard agreed, but for a price. Merlin promised Uther the illusion he needed, to take on the likeness of Igraine's husband, to slip past the gates of Tintagel Castle and lie with her without her knowing. But in exchange, he demanded the child that would come from that night. Uther, desperate and reckless, agreed. And so it happened. While the real Duke of Cornwall was slain in battle, Uther, masked in sorcery, entered the castle and lay with Igraine. By the time the deception unraveled, it was too late. Igraine was now a widow. Uther made her his queen, and not long after, she gave birth to a boy she barely got to hold. Merlin took the child the moment he was born, not out of cruelty but necessity. The boy, born of war and magic, would be hunted by those who feared what he might become. And so, Merlin placed him in the care of a loyal knight, Sir Ector, who raised the boy as his own, without a crown, without a name, without a clue of who he truly was. They called him Arthur. He grew up far from any castle, learning humility, hard work, and the basics of knighthood alongside Ector's son Kay. There were no prophecies spoken over him, no whispers of destiny trailing behind. He was just a boy with a quiet mind, quick hands, and a stubborn sense of justice that would come to define him. And all the while, Merlin watched from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Because Arthur's time was coming, and when it did, the world would never be the same again. Whoso pulleth out this sword? That was all the stone said. No name, no title, no mention of crowns or prophecies. Just a sword, sunk deep into a block of cold granite, resting in the courtyard of a forgotten church in London. The words were simple, but they changed everything. No one knew where the sword came from. It appeared after Uther's death, when Britain had once again fallen into chaos. With no clear heir, lords and knights bickered over claims, drawing blood instead of borders. The land needed a king, but none could agree on who that should be. That's when the sword appeared. Merlin, never one to act without purpose, had arranged it. Not a trick, not an illusion, A test. A quiet challenge left in plain sight, daring any man of noble blood to try. They all did. Noblemen, warlords, sons of kings. They grunted and strained and cursed, but none of them even budged the blade. Then came Arthur, still a teenager, still a nobody. He wasn't trying to prove anything that day. In fact, he wasn't even there for the tournament. He was just looking for a sword for his foster brother Kay, who had forgotten his own back at the inn. Arthur spotted the blade in the stone, thought nothing of it, and, without any ceremony, drew it out like it belonged to him. Because it did. At first, no one believed it. Kay tried to take credit. Sir Ector, stunned, asked Arthur to do it again, and again he pulled the sword with ease. Word spread. Eyes widened. Arguments erupted. The great lords of the realm refused to accept it. A boy? They scoffed. Raised in a common household? But truth has a way of cutting through pride. One by one, the noblest knights failed to replicate what Arthur did so effortlessly. Eventually, even the proudest among them had to face the truth. The sword had chosen him. And so, by blade and by fate, the orphan boy was crowned king. Not with roaring cheers. Not at first. His coronation was met with doubt, suspicion, even rebellion. Arthur had to fight for every scrap of respect, had to earn loyalty not with speeches, but with steel. But over time, as battle followed battle, he proved something no bloodline could. He was the king Britain needed. And in that moment, a boy who had grown up in someone else's home became the center of the realm. The sword in the stone had done its work. Now came the hard part. Ruling. The king that legends grew around wasn't just a man in a crown. He was the kind of figure who turned silence into command and presence into power. Arthur, by most tellings, was not the tallest man in the hall, nor the loudest. But when he entered a room, people noticed. He moved like a man born to rule, not because he demanded obedience, but because others offered it before he asked. Broad-shouldered and strong from the weight of battle, yet never brutish. His face carried the sharp lines of youth tempered by early trials, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than a king of his age should have had. His hair, golden brown and shoulder length, framed a face that was often calm, but never soft. He wore his armor simply, polished steel, meticulously maintained but never ostentatious, with the red cloak of kingship trimmed in gold. The crown he wore wasn't garish, just heavy, and that was enough. It wasn't the kind of crown a man flaunted, it was the kind he carried. But it was Arthur's temperament that made him different. He was calm in ways that unsettled men who mistook stillness for uncertainty. He didn't rush to anger, but when he did speak, especially in moments of conflict, his words cut cleaner than any sword. He listened, he considered, and he led by example. Not just from thrones or battlefields, but from those quiet in-between moments where real leadership lives, staying behind to help the wounded, eating last after his men, kneeling at a dying knight's side to hold his hand. He was loyal, sometimes to a fault, trusting, believing that people could rise to greatness if given the chance. That belief is what built Camelot, but it's also what nearly broke it. His sense of justice was sharp. He believed in law, in honor, in the idea that right and wrong mattered even when no one was looking. But Arthur was no blind idealist. He understood that people were flawed, that loyalty frayed, that love got messy, that sometimes the weight of the crown meant making decisions no man should have to make. As for his skills, he was no mere symbol. Arthur was a warrior, through and through. Raised by Sir Ector, tempered by Merlin, and hardened by war, he knew how to fight. With sword, lance, or bare fists, he was a match for any knight who challenged him. But he didn't relish violence. He used it only when he had to. What truly set him apart was his mind. He was a tactician, a unifier, a king who understood the chessboard of politics just as well as the battlefield, and knew when to speak softly and when to show force. He built alliances where others saw enemies, And he inspired loyalty, the kind men would die for. Even his flaws, his pride, his trust in those who would betray him, his belief that love could exist beside duty, were rooted in his desire to be the best version of himself. And that's what made Arthur legendary, not perfection, but the struggle for it. Arthur didn't inherit a golden age, he built one, from ruins, from division, from blood and borrowed hope. When the sword came free from the stone and Arthur was crowned, there were cheers, but also doubts. Many lords, especially those of noble blood, refused to kneel to a king raised in secrecy, who had no known claim beyond a miracle. Some believed he was nothing more than a pawn placed by Merlin. Others called him a bastard, a child with no right to a throne. But Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't answer suspicion with force, at least not at first. He answered it with action. He began by bringing peace where there had been none. Not through words alone, but through trial, through victory, and, when needed, through war. He challenged the rebellious kings who refused his rule, and when they rose against him in arms, he met them head-on. The 12 rebel kings, a loose alliance of the old guard, underestimated him. They thought him young, untested, easily broken. They were wrong. Arthur's victories came not just from brute strength, but from unity. He rallied knights from every corner of Britain, men drawn not by lineage, but by the vision of something better. He fought alongside them, not above them. And when he won, he didn't crush his enemies, he offered them places at his table. That's how the Round Table began, not as decoration, not as a symbol, but as a promise, that no man, no matter his title or origin, would sit above the others. There would be no head, no foot, no hierarchy, just equals, bound by a shared code. It was revolutionary. Camelot rose from this dream, a castle not just of stone and towers, but of ideals, a place where valor, justice, and loyalty were more than words sewn onto banners. It became the heart of Arthur's Britain, a gathering point for heroes, kings, wanderers, and champions of every sort. Merlin stayed by his side in those early years, advising from the shadows, shaping the roots of what would grow. Guinevere had not yet entered the picture. Neither had betrayal. For a time, the kingdom thrived on belief alone. Arthur oversaw it all, every wall laid, every law passed. He sat through councils, settled land disputes, and walked the fields where his soldiers trained. He was not the kind of king to hide behind high walls. He rode with his men, bled with them, and even buried them when it came to that. And the people who had once looked to him with suspicion began to follow with open hearts. Because for the first time in generations, there was peace. And peace, fragile as it was, would need defending. But for now, Arthur held it, and Camelot stood. The sword and the stone may have made Arthur king, but it was the sword from the lake that made him a legend. After the battles were fought and the rebel kings brought to heel, Arthur stood as the unchallenged ruler of Britain. But he wasn't yet complete. The sword he'd pulled from the stone had broken during a fierce fight, shattered in his defense of a friend. And with it went a piece of the myth. That's when Merlin took him to the lake. They rode in silence, through tangled woods and over quiet hills, until they reached a place where the trees gave way to water so still it mirrored the sky. No birds sang there, no breeze stirred, just a hush, deep and waiting. And then she appeared, the Lady of the Lake. She didn't walk or speak in any way a human might. She rose from the water like a dream given form, tall, radiant, her silver blonde hair drifting like river grass behind her. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and in her hands she held a sword. Excalibur. It wasn't like the blade in the stone. It was older, stranger. The kind of weapon that hummed with power just from being near it. The hilt was inlaid with unfamiliar runes. The blade shimmered as if it had never known rust. And the scabbard, which was said to be worth more than the sword itself, for it could keep its bearer from bleeding out, no matter how deep the wound. The lady didn't ask questions. She didn't speak in riddles. She simply offered the sword to Arthur, holding it above the water, as if daring him to claim what only the worthy could wield. He took it, and in that moment something in him changed. This wasn't about destiny anymore. It was about duty. The sword didn't make him invincible. It reminded him of what he stood to lose. That every king rules at the mercy of the world, and every blade, no matter how magical, cuts both ways. Merlin, standing quietly behind him, said only this: "You must guard the scabbard more dearly than the sword." Arthur didn't understand the warning then, but he would. The blade would win him battles, the scabbard would save his life more than once, and the Lady of the Lake, who gave him both, would not appear again so easily. Not until it was time to return what had been borrowed. Every king has a moment where legend begins to harden into history. For Arthur, that moment was Badon. The Saxons had been a thorn in Britain's side for years. Raiders, invaders, settlers with sharpened spears and no respect for borders. They came in waves, crashing against the coasts and pressing inland. Every kingdom had felt their advance and many had fallen to it. But Arthur wasn't like the other kings. He didn't want to negotiate, he didn't want tribute, he wanted them gone. Badon was the line he drew. The hill itself wasn't special at first glance, just a rounded rise outside a weary town, surrounded by open fields and narrow paths. But Arthur saw something in it, a chance to end the Saxon advance once and for all. To push them back so hard they'd remember his name long after the blood dried. He gathered his knights, not just the Round Table's elite, but every warband and chieftain willing to follow his banner. The old alliances stirred again, and men who once fought each other stood shoulder to shoulder because this wasn't just Arthur's fight anymore. It was Britain's. The Saxons came in force, thousands, their own kings and lords leading the charge. They thought the hill would crumble under their weight. They thought Arthur's knights were nothing more than pampered lords in polished armor. They were wrong. The battle lasted from dawn till well past dusk. It wasn't clean. It wasn't glorious. It was brutal, muddy, and loud. Arrows fell like rain. Horses screamed, swords clashed, and shields splintered. But Arthur was everywhere on the front lines shouting orders, riding like a storm in human form. He was wounded more than once, knocked from his horse, nearly surrounded. But each time, he rose again, Excalibur flashing like a bolt of silver in the sun. Lancelot fought beside him, back to back through the thickest of the fight. Gawain led a charge that broke a Saxon flank wide open. Boars held the line when it nearly collapsed. Every knight earned their place in the songs that day. And when the final blow was struck, when the Saxon banners fell and the survivors limped away, something shifted. The hill was soaked in blood, but Arthur stood atop it, sword raised high. He wasn't just a king anymore, he was the king. From that day forward, Arthur's rule was unquestioned. The Saxons retreated. Peace, however brief, settled over the land, and every child born after would grow up hearing about Badon Hill. How one man held the line for all. But even legends need rest. And while the kingdom cheered, Arthur looked out across the fields, already wondering how long it would last. Because peace is never permanent, especially not in a kingdom built on honor. Arthur had faced swords and sieges, traitors and tyrants, but nothing tested him quite like the shadow cast by his own blood. Morgan Le Fay wasn't always his enemy. In fact, once, long ago, she had simply been his sister. A daughter of Igraine, like Arthur, though by a different father. Raised far from the court, deep in Avalon, or among the priestesses of old Britain, Morgan had a mind sharper than any blade, and a soul steeped in mystery. She knew magic, not the tricks of wandering hedge witches or seers, but deep, ancient things. Words that bent the wind, spells that could make a man forget his own name, or kill without a touch. She learned quickly. She studied harder, and when she looked toward Camelot, it wasn't awe she felt. It was bitterness. Morgan had seen what power did to men. She saw Arthur's rise not as destiny fulfilled, but as a stolen throne. In some versions of the tale, she hated him for what Uther had done to their mother. In others, she envied the love Arthur commanded so effortlessly. But in every telling there is this: Morgan became a danger not through hatred alone, but through heartbreak twisted into vengeance. The affair that bears her name was not just one scheme, it was a series of plots, layered like armor. First came the subtle tests. She disguised herself, entered the court, and offered Arthur a gift, a magical cloak, beautiful and finely made. But it had been cursed. Anyone unfaithful who wore it would burn to ash. Arthur, suspicious, handed it off to an attendant. The poor girl died instantly. Then came Camlann, a knight Morgan ensnared with promises of glory and the whispered gift of Excalibur. She stole it while Arthur slept and gave it to Camlann, setting them on a collision course. In a duel arranged by deceit, Arthur nearly died, unaware he was facing both his sister's puppet and his own blade. But Arthur survived. Wounded, yes. Betrayed, absolutely. But alive. With Merlin's guidance, or in later tales through his own cunning, he reclaimed Excalibur. Camlann died, and Morgan, caught between fury and shame, fled. Yet even then he didn't kill her. He could have. Many said he should have. But Arthur, ever the idealist, still saw the sister beneath the sorceress. He let her go. Whether that was mercy or foolishness depends on who's telling the story. But Morgan did not disappear. She lingered, watching, waiting, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering. A force of chaos, neither fully villain nor ally. She would appear again, in more tales, sometimes healing, sometimes harming, but never without purpose. The affair with Morgan marked a turning point. Until then, Arthur's enemies had come from outside, invaders, rivals, monsters. But Morgan reminded everyone that the sharpest knives are the ones carried close to the heart, and the deepest wounds are often inflicted by family. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. If Arthur's greatest strength was unity, his greatest weakness was what he didn't know. And no secret would haunt his kingdom more than the birth of Mordred. It began long before Mordred ever drew breath, on a night wrapped in deceit, war, and prophecy. Arthur had just secured his throne after a string of hard-won battles. The land was restless, the old kings dead or kneeling, and Arthur, still young, still full of fire, found himself in the stronghold of a woman named Morgause. She was beautiful, intelligent, magnetic, and unknown to him at the time, his half-sister. Arthur hadn't known about her. Their mothers had been the same, Igraine, but born of different fathers. Uther Pendragon had hidden so much, and Merlin, well, even he couldn't control fate. That night, the two shared a bed, and out of that union came a child, Mordred. Neither Arthur nor Morgause knew the truth until much later. By then it didn't matter. The child had already been born, and the future had already been whispered by the druids and the dreamers. They spoke of a child born of incest, a child who would rise against Arthur, a child who would bring about the fall of Camelot. When Arthur found out, he was devastated, not just by the sin of it, but by the fear. He ordered all the newborns born around that time to be cast into the sea, hoping to undo the prophecy by drowning it before it could take root. But Mordred survived. The boat he was placed in was wrecked, yes, but he washed ashore and was taken in by a foster family, far from court. He grew up strong, clever, charismatic, and when he came of age, he joined Arthur's court, unrecognized by most, welcomed even. Arthur never guessed who he truly was, or if he did, he refused to face it. Mordred was everything Arthur once was, sharp-minded, brave, handsome, noble in appearance. But there was a coldness behind his smile, a calculation in his words. He served loyally at first, won battles, gained trust, rose through the ranks. But deep down, the prophecy pulsed like a buried ember. Because fate in these stories doesn't ask permission, it doesn't wait for confession, it just comes for you. And with Mordred, it didn't come with swords or shouts, at least not at first. It came in silence, growing stronger in the shadows, waiting for the moment when Arthur's kingdom would be too tired, too fractured, too distracted by love and war to see what was truly coming. And when that moment came, Mordred wouldn't hesitate. He would not just betray the king, he would break him. Kings may win kingdoms with swords, but they hold them together with alliances, and sometimes with love. Once the dust of war had settled and Britain stood unified under one crown, Arthur turned his gaze toward the future. Peace, though hard-earned, was fragile. He needed more than just strength of arms. He needed roots, and in those days nothing cemented power like a marriage. Guinevere was the daughter of King Leodegrance of Camelot, a loyal ally who had once fought at Arthur's side. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was sharp, composed, and well-spoken. In some versions of the tale, Arthur fell for her the moment he saw her. In others, the match was purely strategic. But either way, the bond was made, and with it came a gift that would shape Arthur's reign forever. The Round Table. It had once belonged to Leodegrance, and before him it belonged to Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon. It was a symbol of equality among warriors. No head, no throne. Every seat held the same weight. When Arthur accepted Guinevere's hand, he accepted the table too, and with it the vision of a new kind of rule, one built on fellowship instead of fear. Their wedding was a grand affair. Nobles from every corner of the realm came to witness the union. Bards sang, wine flowed, and the newly crowned queen took her place beside the king, radiant in white and green, her crown gleaming beside his. But even in celebration there were murmurs. Some whispered she was too proud, others that she was too young, and some, though they kept their voices low, wondered why Lancelot's gaze lingered so long during the ceremony. Still, Arthur smiled. He had peace, a queen, and the Round Table. The realm was stable, the future bright. But the truth of it is this: Guinevere was not a woman meant for quiet court life, and Arthur, though a good man and a great king, would never be the only one to hold her heart. The marriage began in strength, but it would not end that way, because even kings can't command love. And some stories are already written before the vows are ever spoken. You can build a kingdom with stone, but if you want it to last, you build it with people you trust. The Round Table wasn't just furniture, it was a symbol, an idea, a statement to every knight, lord, and visiting king who stepped into Arthur's hall, that no man, not even the king, sat above another. That justice didn't bow to titles and strength meant little without honor, but an empty table meant nothing. Arthur needed the best to sit around it, not just warriors with sharp blades, but men with sharper minds, loyal hearts, and courage that ran deeper than fear of death. And so began the long, ongoing task of gathering the greatest knights in the realm. Some came on their own, drawn by the growing legend of Camelot. Others had to be sought out, found in distant keeps or on lonely roads, where their names were still whispered, but their faces hadn't been seen in years. Some were tested, forced to prove themselves in duels and riddles or in acts of mercy, and a few were risks. There was Gawain, fiery and fearless, Percival, young but unshakable, Tristan, haunted by love and loss, Galahad, pure of heart and terrifying with a blade, and Lancelot, of course, first among them, though that title was never officially spoken. Each had their story, each had their flaws, and Arthur welcomed them all. In time, the table filled with names that would echo for centuries. They took oaths, not just to the king, but to each other, to protect the weak, to seek truth, to stand for what was right, even when no one was watching. But not every knight stayed true. Not every bond held, and not every seat remained warm. The table was round, yes, but even perfect circles can crack. Still, for a while it worked. The land grew peaceful. The court became a place of laughter and justice. And in those golden years, it seemed like Arthur had truly done it. He had built something better than a kingdom. He had built a brotherhood. But even the strongest brotherhoods can't withstand what's coming, because greatness always attracts shadows, and some oaths, no matter how noble, aren't strong enough to silence the pull of fate. There was a time, brief and bright, when Arthur ruled not just Britain but hope itself. The land was at peace. The Round Table was whole. His knights rode out not to settle old grudges, but to chase glory, to answer calls for help from distant lands. It was Camelot at its height, and for a little while, it felt like nothing could ever bring it down. That was when Rome came knocking. Not with legions, but with a demand. The Emperor Lucius Tiberius sent a message across the sea. Arthur was to pay tribute. Britain, he claimed, still belonged to Rome. Arthur's crown, his throne, even his victories, according to Lucius, they were borrowed things, and it was time to settle the debt. Arthur didn't hesitate. He gathered his court, read the demand aloud, and when the silence fell, he stood and said what everyone was already thinking. And so the war began. Arthur crossed the Channel with a host of Britain's finest, Lancelot, Gawain, Kay, Bors, Guinevere, and more. It wasn't just about conquest, it was a message. Camelot was not Rome's to command. The campaign was brutal and brilliant. The Romans expected arrogance, they got strategy. Arthur outmaneuvered them in Gaul, then again near the Alps. His knights scattered enemy forces like dry leaves. Even when the emperor finally committed his full strength, it wasn't enough. On the fields near Soissons, Arthur met Lucius face to face in battle and left him dead beneath the banners of Britain. When he returned home, it was as a king confirmed, not just the ruler of a fractured island, but of something bigger. A man whose name would echo beyond his borders, beyond his time. For a moment, everything he had built seemed unshakable. But Camelot would not fall to armies. It would fall from within. For years, Arthur had trusted Lancelot more than any man alive. The victories, the loyalty, the unshakable courage. Lancelot had been his sword and shield through every war. And when whispers began to surface, whispers of glances, of late-night meetings, of something unspoken between the queen and the knight, Arthur chose not to hear them. Or perhaps he already knew. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It happened quietly at first, a trap laid by Agravain and Mordred, meant to catch Lancelot and Guinevere in a moment that couldn't be explained away. And it worked. Swords were drawn, blood spilled. That's when it all broke. Arthur had no choice but to act. Guinevere was sentenced to death, and as the pyre was lit, Lancelot returned, fury and heartbreak riding with him. He cut through the executioners. Gawain's brothers Gareth and Gaheris were caught in the crossfire, cut down by Lancelot in a desperate escape. Lifted the queen into his arms and fled to Joyous-Gard, his fortress in the north. The king followed. He marched with his army, and Gawain, blinded by grief, rode at his side, demanding justice not just for the realm, but for his brothers. What followed was a war that should never have happened. A war not of conquest, but of betrayal and broken trust. Camelot's finest clashed at gates they once guarded together. Gawain and Lancelot fought again and again, duels filled with rage, regret, and mercy too late to matter. Each time, Lancelot refused to kill him. Each time, Gawain returned, angrier than before. And still, Lancelot held his ground. But even as Joyous-Gard withstood the siege, the cracks in the kingdom widened. Old allies turned cold. The Round Table, once a symbol of unity, had become a memory sharpened into a blade. Then word arrived. Mordred had seized the throne. He'd spread the lie that Arthur had fallen in France. He'd claimed the crown, taken the queen, and declared himself rightful king. At once, the siege dissolved. Arthur turned his army homeward. The war with Lancelot was over, but only because something worse had risen in its place. And Lancelot, watching from the battlements, sword lowered, heart fractured, knew this was no victory. He had survived, but Camelot was already dying. Mordred had been a shadow in Arthur's story for a long time, a half-known son, born of a night veiled in sorcery and silence, a consequence of a mistake Arthur barely understood until it was too late. But for years Mordred played the loyal knight, sharp-tongued, cold-eyed, but bound to the round table like the rest. And then, when Arthur sailed for the continent in his war with Lancelot, Mordred struck. He wasn't subtle. He didn't hide behind proxies or masks. The moment Arthur left Britain's shores, Mordred crowned himself king. He claimed the throne. He claimed Guinevere, and he wrapped it all in a lie. That Arthur was dead, lost in foreign lands, never to return. Some believed him. They were tired of wars, of taxes, of waiting for kings who vanished chasing glory across the sea. Mordred's voice was calm, his promises simple. Stability and strength. But not everyone bought it. Guinevere fled. She locked herself in the Tower of London, refusing to play queen to the man who called himself king. Loyalists spread word across the countryside, gathering what resistance they could. And beneath it all was the bitter truth. Mordred didn't want peace. He wanted power. All of it. When Arthur heard what had happened, he didn't hesitate. He broke from his campaign, turned the army around, sailed back to Britain with fire behind his eyes and war in his heart. But the land he returned to, it wasn't the same. The court was fractured, the knights scattered. The round table was no longer whole. Some had pledged themselves to Mordred, whether out of fear, ambition, or despair. Others had gone into hiding, waiting for the dust to settle. Mordred hadn't just betrayed Arthur. He'd betrayed the dream, the round table, the code, the fragile idea that men could be more than swords and blood. And that betrayal would cost them all. Arthur had always been a man of the waking world. He put his trust in blades and banners, in counsel and action, not in omens. But dreams have a way of reaching even the most grounded of kings, especially when they come wrapped in the voice of someone long gone. It happened the night before Camlann. That night, sleep took him not gently, but deeply. And in the dream, Gawain stood before him. Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew, his loyal knight, his fallen brother in arms, dead from wounds sustained during the siege of Joyous Gard, as well as the smaller skirmishes with Mordred's army, now stood clad in the white of the grave. He looked not like a ghost, but like the man he had been, brave, resolute, honest. And yet his face was etched with sorrow. He told Arthur to wait. He warned that if he fought Mordred the next day he would die, that both would fall, that blood would drown the last light of Camelot. He begged Arthur to delay, just 3 days longer. Reinforcements from Lancelot, now across the sea again, were coming. With them, Arthur could win. Without them, all was lost. Arthur awoke shaken. For once, the dream clung to him like truth. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't speak of it lightly. He gathered his commanders and proposed a temporary truce. Just 3 days. Enough time for fate to change course. Enough time, perhaps, for Lancelot to arrive. A meeting was arranged between Arthur and Mordred in a field between camps. Each side brought a small retinue. Weapons were to remain sheathed. Words, not swords, would decide the next move. But fate has no respect for treaties. A soldier on Arthur's side drew his blade, not out of betrayal, but to kill a snake that had slithered through the grass. In the tense silence, that glint of steel was enough. Mordred's men assumed treachery. Arthur's men reacted. Chaos ignited. And just like that, the dream became prophecy. The last battle had begun, not because of ambition or malice, but because of fear, misread intentions, and the fragile nature of peace. Arthur had tried to listen. He had heeded the warning, but fate, it seemed, had already made up its mind. Steel clashed, horses screamed. Men who had once fought side by side now carved through each other like strangers. The dream of Camelot died inch by inch beneath boots and blades. Arthur fought like the king he had always tried to be, tireless, brave, tragic. He pushed through the lines, searching for Mordred, knowing it would only end one way. And he found him. They met not as father and son, but as warriors with no other choice left. Their blades rang out in the silence between war cries. Arthur struck first, driving his spear through Mordred's chest. But before Mordred fell, he surged forward, impaling himself deeper just to land one final blow. His sword found Arthur's side. They both fell. The battlefield quieted. Mordred died there, cold and still, eyes open to a sky that would never change for him again. Arthur, mortally wounded, was carried away by the few knights who still stood. Sir Lucan, bleeding himself, helped him as far as he could. Sir Bedivere, silent with grief, stayed by the king's side. The round table was gone, the kingdom broken, and the king who had held it all together was slipping away. Arthur's wound was deep, too deep, the kind of wound no salve or swordsmith could fix. He bled slow, held upright only by the last of his strength and the loyalty of those still standing beside him. This could have been prevented, if only Arthur had heeded Merlin's warnings. Somewhere along the way, Arthur lost the scabbard to his sword. Some say it was stolen by Morgan Le Fay, some say it was lost during his many battles. But regardless, it was not here to heal him now. Sir Lucan died before the sun set, his own injuries too much to bear, collapsing as he tried to carry the king to safety. That left Sir Bedivere. They made it to the shoreline, cold air, gray skies, water lapping against rocks that didn't care about kings or wars. Arthur could barely speak, but he gave one final command. Take Excalibur, throw it into the lake. Bedivere hesitated, not because he didn't love his king, but because the sword felt sacred. Like casting it away would mean losing the last piece of something holy. So the first time, he walked to the shore and hid it. Arthur asked what he saw. Nothing, Bedivere said. Only waves. Arthur closed his eyes, tired. Then you have not done as I asked. Bedivere went back a second time and came back with the same lie, same guilt. Only on the third try did Bedivere obey. He threw the sword high into the air, and from the lake, a hand rose, pale, strong, wrapped in silver. It caught the blade mid-fall and slowly slipped back beneath the surface. When he returned, Arthur nodded. A boat appeared not long after, silent, dark, draped in mist, and on it stood 3 queens, veiled and watching. Among them, some say, was Morgan Le Fay. They took Arthur in their arms, laid him upon the barge, and drifted out into the mists. Bedivere called after him, "Where are you going, my lord?" But Arthur didn't answer. Some say he died then, his final breath slipping out with the tide. Others believe he was carried to Avalon to be healed, to rest until the day that Britain needs him again, until the world grows dark enough to call him back. He is not gone, they say, only waiting. And so the king passed, not with fire, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. The boy raised in secret, the ruler who dreamed of a better kingdom, the man who held love and duty in both hands until they shattered. Arthur Pendragon, King of Camelot, the once and future king.